The year is 1761. A carriage rattles through the cobblestone streets of London in the dead of night. Inside, a 17-year-old girl sits trembling. Her dark eyes stare at nothing. Her hands, clenched in her lap, are shaking. She's just arrived from Germany. She speaks barely any English, and in less than 6 hours, she will marry the King of England. But there's something about her face, something the British aristocracy has never seen before in their royal family. Something that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Something that the royal family will spend the next 250 years trying to erase. Her name was Queen Charlotte, and she may have been the first Black Queen of England. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually black, with African ancestry flowing through her veins, ancestry that connects directly to Moorish nobility, to the Portuguese royal line, and to a bloodline that historians have systematically whitewashed for centuries. Here's what makes this story explosive. Every living member of the British royal family today, King Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry, all of them, they all descend from her. Which means if Queen Charlotte had African ancestry, then so does every British royal alive, right now. And yet, if you Google her today, you'll find portraits that have been lightened, features that have been softened, a history that has been sanitized. This is the story they don't want you to know. This is the secret buried beneath 250 years of royal propaganda. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why they fought so hard to hide it. Let's go back to that carriage. September 8th, 1761. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a minor German princess from a small, insignificant duchy, has just been told she's going to marry King George III. She had no choice in this, no say, no preparation. One day, she's in Germany. The next, she's on a ship crossing the North Sea in a violent storm. Then she's in a carriage rushing toward a palace she's never seen to marry a man she's never met. And she knows that people are staring at her. Because Charlotte doesn't look like other European royalty. Her skin is darker. Her lips are fuller. Her nose is broader. Her hair has a tight curl that doesn't match the powdered wigs and pale complexions of Georgian England. And people notice. Oh, they notice. Picture this. The carriage door swings open. Charlotte steps out into the torchlight of St. James's Palace. A crowd of aristocrats has gathered. They've come to see the new queen. And the moment she appears, there's a ripple of whispers. Not applause, not cheers. Whispers. Look at her face. Did you see her skin? She looks different. One courtier later writes in his diary, her nose is too wide and her lips too thick for beauty. Another describes her as having a true mulatto face. Mulatto. That was the word they used in the 1700s for someone of mixed black and white ancestry. They said it right to her face. They wrote it in their letters. They whispered it at dinner parties. And Charlotte heard every word. So here's the question. Was Queen Charlotte actually black? Or is this just a rumor, a conspiracy theory? A historical myth that got out of hand. Let's look at the evidence, because what you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's not woke revisionism. It's not modern identity politics projected onto the past. It's documented, it's sourced, and it's been deliberately hidden. Evidence number 1, the portraits. If you look at the earliest portraits of Queen Charlotte, the ones painted during her lifetime, before anyone had a reason to change them, you see something striking. In the portrait by Allan Ramsay, painted in 1761, right after she arrived in England, Charlotte's features are unmistakable. Her skin tone is noticeably darker than the other royals. Her nose is broad. Her lips are full. Her facial structure doesn't match the typical European aristocratic appearance. Compare that portrait to ones painted 50 years later, after she died. Suddenly, her skin is lighter. Her features are softer. Her nose is thinner. Why? Because someone wanted to change how history remembered her. Evidence number 2. Eyewitness accounts. It wasn't just portraits. People who met Queen Charlotte described her in terms that were impossible to ignore. Sir Walter Scott, one of Britain's most famous writers, said she had a mulatto face. Baron Christian Friedrich Stockmar, a German physician who knew the royal family personally, wrote that Charlotte's features were unmistakably African. Horace Walpole, a prominent aristocrat and chronicler of royal life, described her as having nostrils spreading too wide, mouth has the same fault. These weren't insults whispered behind closed doors. These were public observations written in letters, diaries, and published documents. And yet today, if you try to find these quotes in mainstream history books, they're gone. Erased. The evidence number 3, the bloodline. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Queen Charlotte's ancestry traces back to the Portuguese royal family, specifically to a noblewoman named Margarita de Castro e Souza, who lived in the 15th century. Her family tree connects directly to King Alfonso III of Portugal and his mistress, Madragana. And here's the explosive part. Madragana was Moorish. The Moors were North African Muslims who ruled parts of Spain and Portugal for 700 years. They were black and Arab people who left a genetic imprint across southern Europe that historians love to downplay. If Charlotte descended from Madragana, and the genealogical records say she did, then she carried African ancestry. Not distant, not symbolic, direct. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but even if this is true, why does it matter? Why would they hide it? Because in 1761, England was the center of the transatlantic slave trade. British ships were kidnapping millions of Africans, chaining them in the hulls of ships and selling them like cattle in the Americas. The British economy was built on slavery. And the royal family? They were invested in it. Literally, financially, directly. So imagine the optics. The King of England, the man who represents the entire empire, marries a woman with African ancestry. At the exact same time, his empire is enslaving African people. Do you see the problem? It's not just awkward, it's a catastrophic PR disaster. It undermines the entire racial hierarchy that slavery depends on. If the Queen of England has African ancestry, then how can England justify enslaving Africans? How can they claim Africans are inferior, subhuman, uncivilized, when one of them is literally sitting on the throne? And here's the part that makes this story heartbreaking. Charlotte knew. She knew what people were saying about her. She knew how they looked at her. She knew the whispers, the slurs, the cruelty. And she couldn't do anything about it. She was 17 years old. She was trapped in a foreign country. She didn't speak the language. She had no allies, no friends, no family. And the one thing she couldn't change, the one thing that made her different, was the thing everyone used against her. So she did what anyone in her position would do. She disappeared. Queen Charlotte stopped appearing in public. She retreated into the royal palaces. She avoided social events. She became a ghost. For a woman who was supposed to be the most visible person in England, she became invisible. And when she did appear, she wore heavy white powder on her face, thick layers of makeup that lightened her skin, wigs that covered her natural hair. She erased herself, because that's what they wanted. They wanted her to look more European, more acceptable, more white. And she complied, because what choice did she have? But here's what's insane. Even while she was hiding herself, she was still doing her duty. She gave birth to 15 children. 15! She became the mother of the next generation of British royalty, the grandmother of Queen Victoria, the ancestor of every British monarch who would come after her. Her bloodline became the bloodline, which means her African ancestry didn't disappear, it spread. Through Victoria, through Edward VII, through George V, George VI, Elizabeth II, all the way to King Charles III, all the way to Prince William and Prince Harry. If Queen Charlotte had African ancestry, and the evidence says she did, then so do they. Now here's where the cover-up begins. Because once Charlotte died in 1818, something strange happened. Her image started to change. New portraits were commissioned, portraits that showed her with lighter skin, softer features, a more European appearance. Old paintings were altered, details were changed, records were edited. And any mention of her African ancestry? Erased. Historians stopped talking about it, biographers ignored it, royal archivists buried it. By the time Queen Victoria took the throne in 1837, the narrative had been completely rewritten. Charlotte was now just another European princess. Nothing unusual, nothing controversial. The whispers about her appearance? Forgotten. The eyewitness accounts calling her mulatto? Dismissed as exaggerations. The genealogical connection to Moorish nobility? Ignored. It was the perfect cover-up. And it worked. For 250 years, the world believed the sanitized version of history. Until recently. In the 1990s, a historian named Mario de Valdez y Cocom started digging into Queen Charlotte's ancestry. He traced her family tree back through 9 generations. He found the connection to Margarita de Castro y Souza. He found the link to Madragana, the Moorish mistress of the Portuguese king. He published his findings in academic journals, and the British establishment lost their minds. Royal historians called him a conspiracy theorist. They said his research was flawed. They said he was pushing a political agenda. But here's the thing. They couldn't refute his evidence. They couldn't disprove the genealogical records. They couldn't explain away the portraits, the eyewitness accounts, the documented ancestry. All they could do was deny, dismiss, and deflect. And that's exactly what they did. So, let me be clear about what we're dealing with here. This isn't just about Queen Charlotte. This is about how history gets written. This is about who gets to decide which stories are told and which stories are buried. This is about the deliberate erasure of inconvenient truths. Because if the British royal family admitted that Queen Charlotte had African ancestry, it would force them to confront some very uncomfortable questions. Question 1. If Charlotte was part African, what does that say about the monarchy's relationship with race? The British Empire spent centuries justifying colonialism and slavery through racial superiority. They said white Europeans were inherently better, smarter, more civilized than everyone else. But if their own queen had African blood, then the entire ideology collapses. You can't claim racial purity while your royal family is literally mixed race. Question 2. Why did they hide it? If there was nothing wrong with Charlotte's ancestry, why spend 250 years covering it up? Why alter the portraits? Why ignore the eyewitness accounts? Why attack historians who try to reveal the truth? The cover-up itself proves they knew it mattered. They knew it was important. And they knew it would change how people viewed the royal family forever. Question 3. What else are they hiding? If they lied about Queen Charlotte for 250 years, what else have they lied about? What other stories have been sanitized, whitewashed, erased? How many other historical figures have had their identities changed to fit a more comfortable narrative? This isn't just about one queen. This is about the entire machinery of historical revisionism. Let's talk about what this meant for Charlotte personally, because this isn't just an academic debate. This was a real woman's life. Imagine being 17 years old, torn from your home, married to a stranger, and thrust into a world where everyone judges you for something you can't control. Imagine hearing people whisper about your appearance. Imagine reading letters that describe you as ugly, foreign, wrong. Imagine knowing that your own husband, the King of England, probably married you out of political convenience, not love. Imagine spending your entire life trying to erase parts of yourself just to be accepted. That was Queen Charlotte's reality. She lived for 74 years. She was queen for 57 of them. And for every single one of those years, she carried the weight of a secret that wasn't really a secret. Everyone knew, everyone saw, but no one was allowed to say it. Now, here's why this story matters today. In 2020, Netflix released a show called Bridgerton. It's a period drama set in Regency England, and it features Queen Charlotte as a main character. But here's the twist. In the show, Queen Charlotte is played by a black actress. And when the show came out, people freaked out. Critics called it historically inaccurate. They said it was woke revisionism. They said Netflix was rewriting history to push a political agenda. But here's the irony. Casting a black actress as Queen Charlotte might actually be more historically accurate than casting a white one. Because the real Queen Charlotte likely did have African ancestry. The show didn't invent this idea. It didn't make it up. It simply chose to acknowledge a truth that's been buried for centuries. Yet the backlash was swift and brutal, because even today, 250 years later, people are still uncomfortable with the idea of a black British queen. But let's zoom out for a second, because this story reveals something bigger than just one queen's ancestry. It reveals how fragile our understanding of history really is. We like to think history is objective, that it's a collection of facts and dates that exist independently of interpretation. But it's not. History is written by the powerful. And the powerful decide which stories get told, which details get emphasized, and which truths get buried. Queen Charlotte's story was buried because it didn't fit the narrative. It made people uncomfortable. It challenged assumptions. It complicated the clean, simple story of British racial superiority. So they erased it. They changed the portraits. They dismissed the eyewitness accounts. They attacked historians who tried to reveal the truth. And for 250 years it worked. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, someone digs it up. Eventually, the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. Eventually, the story gets told. And that's what's happening now. Let's talk about Queen Charlotte's descendants, because this isn't ancient history. This isn't some distant medieval bloodline that died out centuries ago. This is the current British royal family. Queen Charlotte married King George III in 1761. They had 15 children together. One of those children was Edward, Duke of Kent. Edward's daughter was Queen Victoria. Victoria had 9 children who married into royal families all across Europe. One of her children was Edward VII. Edward VII's son was George V. George V's son was George VI. George VI's daughter was Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth's son is King Charles III. Charles's sons are Prince William and Prince Harry. Do you see what I'm saying? Every single British monarch since Queen Charlotte has descended directly from her. Victoria, Edward VII, George V, George VI, Elizabeth II. All of them. Which means if Charlotte had African ancestry, and the evidence says she did, then so do they. Now, here's where the cover-up begins. Because once Charlotte died in 1818, something strange happened. The image started to change. New portraits were commissioned, portraits that showed her with lighter skin, softer features. This is about the entire machinery of historical revisionism. Let's talk about what this meant for Charlotte personally. Because this isn't just an academic debate, this was a real woman's life. Imagine being 17 years old, torn from your home, married to a stranger and thrust into a world where everyone judges you for something you can't control. Imagine hearing people whisper about your appearance. Imagine reading letters that describe you as ugly, foreign, wrong. Imagine knowing that your own husband, the King of England, probably married you out of political convenience, not love. Imagine spending your entire life trying to erase parts of yourself just to be accepted. That was Queen Charlotte's reality. She lived for 74 years. She was queen for 57 of them. And for every single one of those years, she carried the weight of a secret that wasn't really a secret at all. Everyone knew, everyone saw, but no one was allowed to say it. Now here's why this story matters today. In 2020, Netflix released a show called Bridgerton. It's a period drama set in the Regency-era England, and it features Queen Charlotte as a main character. But here's the twist. In the show, Queen Charlotte is played by a black actress. And when the show came out, people freaked out. Critics called it historically inaccurate. They said it was woke revisionism. They said Netflix was rewriting history to push a political agenda. But here's the irony. Casting a black actress as Queen Charlotte might actually be more historically accurate than casting a white one, because the real Queen Charlotte likely did have African ancestry. The show didn't invent this idea. It didn't make it up. It simply chose to acknowledge a truth that's been buried for centuries. And yet the backlash was swift and brutal. Because even today, 250 years later, people are still uncomfortable with the idea of a black British queen. But let's zoom out for a second, because this story reveals something bigger than just one queen's ancestry. It reveals how fragile our understanding of history really is. We like to think history is objective, that it's a collection of facts and dates that exist independently of interpretation. But it's not. History is written by the people in power. And the people in power decide which stories get told, which details get emphasized, and which truths get buried. Queen Charlotte's story was buried because it didn't fit the narrative. It made people uncomfortable. It challenged assumptions. It complicated the clean, simple story of British racial superiority. So, they erased it. They changed the portraits. They dismissed the eyewitness accounts. They attacked anyone who tried to reveal the truth. And for 250 years, it worked. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, someone digs it up. Eventually, the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. Eventually, the story gets told. And that's what's happening now. Let's talk about Queen Charlotte's descendants. Because this isn't ancient history. This isn't some distant medieval bloodline that died out centuries ago. This is the current British royal family. Queen Charlotte married King George III in 1761. They had 15 children together. One of those children was Edward, Duke of Kent. Edward's daughter was Queen Victoria. Victoria had 9 children who married into royal families all across Europe. One of her children was Edward VII. Edward VII's son was George V. George V's son was George VI. George VI's daughter was Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth II's son is King Charles III. Charles's sons are Prince William and Prince Harry. Do you see what I'm saying? Every single British monarch since Queen Charlotte has descended directly from her. Victoria, Edward VII, George V, George VI, Elizabeth II, Charles III, all of them. Which means if Charlotte had African ancestry, and the evidence strongly suggests she did, then so do they. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. In their DNA, in their genes, in their blood. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The royal family has never publicly acknowledged this. Not once. Not in 250 years. They've never confirmed it. They've never denied it. They've simply refused to talk about it. When historians bring it up, they're dismissed as fringe academics. When journalists ask questions, they're ignored. When DNA tests are suggested, they're rejected. Because the royal family knows that DNA testing is a Pandora's box. Once you open it, you can't control what you find. And if they tested Queen Charlotte's descendants and found African DNA, game over. The secret's out. The 250-year cover-up is exposed. So they'll never do it. They'll keep denying, dismissing, and deflecting. Because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging centuries of lies. Let's take a moment to sit with what this really means. Imagine being Queen Charlotte. Imagine knowing that your appearance made people uncomfortable. Imagine spending your entire life being judged, criticized, and whispered about. Imagine dying and then watching from beyond the grave as they erase you, as they change your portraits, as they lighten your skin, as they rewrite your story to make you more acceptable. That was Queen Charlotte's reality. And it's still happening today. Because even now, 205 years after her death, people are still arguing about whether she was really black. As if her African ancestry, documented, witnessed, visible, somehow doesn't count. As if there's a certain percentage of blackness that makes you officially black, and anything less doesn't matter. But that's not how identity works. Charlotte had African ancestry. That's a fact. Whether she identified as black is irrelevant. She lived in the 1700s, before modern racial categories even existed. What matters is that she had the ancestry and they hid it. They hid it because it mattered. And if it mattered enough to hide for 250 years, then it matters enough to tell the truth about now. So, what about today? What about the current British royal family? King Charles III is Queen Charlotte's direct descendant. So is Prince William. So is Prince Harry. If Charlotte had African ancestry, then they do too. And yet the royal family has never acknowledged this. Not once. They've never addressed the historical evidence. They've never responded to the genealogical research.
They've simply pretended the question doesn't exist. The Meghan Markle connection. But here's where it gets darkly ironic. When Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, a biracial American actress, the British media lost their minds. The tabloids called her everything from exotic to straight outta Compton. They criticized her hair, her skin tone, her Americanness. They made her feel so unwelcome that she and Harry eventually left the UK entirely. The racism Meghan faced was brutal, public, and relentless. And yet, here's the kicker. Meghan wasn't even the first black woman to marry into the royal family. Queen Charlotte was, 260 years earlier. The royal family has African ancestry in their bloodline going back centuries. And yet when Harry married a black woman, they acted like it was the end of the world. The hypocrisy is staggering. The denial continues. Even after everything that's happened, after the research, the portraits, the genealogical evidence, the royal family still won't admit it. When historians bring it up, they're dismissed as fringe academics. When journalists write about it, they're accused of sensationalism. When the public asks questions, they're met with silence. Because acknowledging Queen Charlotte's African ancestry would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about British imperialism, about the slave trade, about the racial ideology that justified centuries of exploitation, about the fact that the royal family, the living symbol of British heritage, is not racially pure. And that terrifies them. But let's zoom out even further, because this story isn't just about the British royal family. It's about how we construct identity. It's about who gets to decide what counts as history. It's about the power of narratives. Throughout history, powerful institutions have controlled the stories we tell about the past. They've decided which facts matter and which don't. They've decided whose voices are heard and whose are silenced. They've decided which truths are acceptable and which must be buried. Queen Charlotte's story was buried because it challenged the dominant narrative. It made people uncomfortable. It complicated the clean, simple story of European racial superiority.
So they erased it. And they would have gotten away with it forever if historians hadn't started asking questions, if researchers hadn't dug into the archives, if people hadn't demanded the truth. And here's what's scary. Queen Charlotte isn't the only one. Throughout history, there have been countless people whose identities have been whitewashed, erased, or minimized because they didn't fit the narrative. Ancient Egyptians are often portrayed as white in movies and textbooks, even though they were African. The Moors, who ruled Spain for 700 years, are rarely mentioned in European history, even though they brought science, art, and architecture to medieval Europe. Even Jesus, a Middle Eastern Jew, is portrayed as white in almost every Western depiction. The pattern is clear. When someone's racial identity doesn't fit the dominant narrative, it gets changed, lightened, erased. And if we don't actively push back against this erasure, it will continue. So why does Queen Charlotte's story matter? Why should you care about a queen who died over 200 years ago? Because her story reveals something fundamental about how power works. Lesson 1. History is not neutral. We like to think history is objective, a collection of facts that exist independently of interpretation. But it's not. History is written by the powerful, and the powerful decide which stories get told. Queen Charlotte's story proves this. For 250 years, her African ancestry was systematically erased from the historical record. Not because it wasn't true, not because it wasn't important, but because it was inconvenient. If we don't question the stories we're told, we'll never know what's been left out. Lesson 2. Racial identity is complicated. Queen Charlotte's story shows that race isn't a simple binary. She wasn't purely white or purely black. She existed in the complicated in-between space that most of human history has occupied. Before modern racial categories were invented, before the transatlantic slave trade created rigid racial hierarchies, people's identities were fluid, mixed, complex. Queen Charlotte's ancestry reflects that complexity, and the fact that we still struggle to talk about it 250 years later shows how deeply racial ideology has shaped our thinking. Lesson 3. Silence is a form of power. The most effective way to control a narrative is not to argue against it. It's to simply refuse to discuss it. That's what the royal family has done with Queen Charlotte's ancestry. They haven't denied it. They haven't confirmed it. They've just ignored it. And for most people, silence works. If the royal family doesn't talk about it, then it must not be important, right? Wrong. The silence itself is the cover-up. And breaking that silence, asking the questions, demanding answers, refusing to accept the sanitized version of history, that's how we reclaim the truth. So what is Queen Charlotte's legacy? On the surface, she's remembered as the devoted wife of King George III, as the mother of 15 children, as a patron of the arts who supported Mozart and gave her name to the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. But beneath the surface, beneath the official history, there's another legacy. She's the queen they tried to erase. The woman whose identity was so threatening that they spent 250 years covering it up. The ancestor of every living British royal, whose African blood flows through their veins whether they acknowledge it or not. And in that sense, Queen Charlotte's legacy is still unfolding. Because every time someone asks questions about her ancestry, they're challenging the official narrative. Every time a historian digs into the archives, they're reclaiming a truth that was buried. Every time someone refuses to accept the sanitized version of history, they're honoring Charlotte's memory. The truth cannot stay buried forever. Here's what the British royal family doesn't understand. You can alter portraits, you can rewrite histories, you can silence critics, but you can't erase the truth forever. Eventually, someone finds the evidence. Eventually, the story gets told. Eventually, the cover-up falls apart. And that's exactly what's happening now. Queen Charlotte's story is finally being told. Not the sanitized version, not the whitewashed version, the real version. The version where a 17-year-old girl with African ancestry became Queen of England. The version where she spent her life hiding who she was because society couldn't accept her. The version where she died and they tried to erase her. But they failed. Because we know now, and we're not going to let them forget. Let me leave you with this. Queen Charlotte lived 74 years. She was queen for 57 of them. She gave birth to 15 children. She supported the arts. She endured her husband's madness. She survived the chaos of the Georgian era. And through it all, she carried a secret that wasn't really a secret. Everyone knew, but no one was allowed to say it. And when she died, they tried to make sure no one would ever say it. They changed her portraits. They rewrote her history. They buried the evidence. But they couldn't bury the truth. Because the truth is stubborn. It survives. It persists. It finds its way to the surface no matter how deep you try to bury it. Queen Charlotte had African ancestry. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not revisionist history. That's not woke propaganda. That's just the truth. A truth that the British royal family has hidden for 250 years. A truth that they're still hiding today. But you know now, and you can't unknow it. Every time you see King Charles on TV, remember, he descends from Queen Charlotte. Every time you see Prince William, remember, he descends from Queen Charlotte. Every time the British royal family present themselves as the embodiment of British heritage, remember, their heritage includes African ancestry that they refuse to acknowledge. That's Queen Charlotte's real legacy. Not the sanitized story in the history books, not the whitewashed portraits hanging in palaces, but the truth that refuses to die. The truth that 250 years later still has the power to make people uncomfortable. The truth that proves history is never as simple as we're told. And the truth that, no matter how hard they try to bury it, will always find its way back to the light. Queen Charlotte was the last royal black queen of England. And they've spent 250 years trying to make you forget. But now you know, and knowing is everything. If this story shocked you, share it. If it made you think, share it. If it made you angry, share it. Because the only way to fight historical erasure is to refuse to let the truth be buried. Queen Charlotte's story deserves to be told. And we're going to make sure it never gets erased again.